By now, we all probably know that the reptile community, hobby, industry, whatever we want to call it, can be a really great, amazing, and wonderful place where we meet a bunch of really cool people, interact with amazing, beautiful, misunderstood animals, but could also, like everything else in the world, be a little bit of a place of contention. And so that's what I want to talk about today is five of some of the most controversial topics in the reptile hobby right now and my hot takes on them. So, with me today is Pi, my little girl here, who is a call sunglow, and we're just going to get right into that. So, the first one is one that I've actually talked about fairly recently, and that is rack systems, specifically in keeping a lot of different species in reptile rack systems. The biggest culprit is usually ball pythons, but lots of other animals are kept in racks as well. And I've talked about in the past, basically what it is racks are a double-edged sword for the reptile industry. While they certainly cannot give absolutely everything possible to the mental and physical enrichment needs of the animals, it also makes it so we have enough animals to continue to grow the hobby. If every single ball python was kept in a 4x2x2 enclosure, the cost of a normal ball python would probably be somewhere around $200 to $300, which means that all the morphs would be even more because just the total cost and the amount that we would have, essentially, our ability to make the many animals goes way down. The demand for these animals is still very high, so the cost of them is going to go up as well as the additional cost of the overhead for the actual breeders. So instead of just this rack systems that I have behind me, which albeit are much larger than what most people keep their snakes in as far as rack systems go, they don't have all of the lighting. They're not as large. There's still quite a bit more of that. If we give everything that we absolutely could, which in a perfect world I really wish we could, the cost of those things all go up. And then there's a barrier to entry for people getting into the hobby, and then the hobby doesn't grow as much. I think as we continue to move forward, individual keepers and hobbyists will absolutely take the next steps and grow and do so much better for their individual animals. But for small batch breeders like myself, or even some of the larger ones out there that we all know about, they are kind of a necessary evil, unfortunately, and that's kind of my hot take on racks. The next one is one that has been going on for a very, very long time, and that is live feeding. So live feeding is another one that a lot of people get really weird about, and I'm just going to be completely straight honest with you. I don't really like live feeding, especially for the larger rodents. Sorry, I'm just messing with the microphone. A cornered rat can do a lot of damage to a snake or even a large lizard like a tegu or a monitor or something. If you're feeding live, a cornered rat that doesn't get taken by the animal, by the reptile right away, can do a lot of damage, and if it doesn't eat right away, it can also kill that animal. It's not something that's very pretty. It's not something we don't like to talk about. So that's why frozen thought is such a big proponent of the reptile industry. However, there are a lot of arguments, and rightly so, that have been documented and made that allowing the animal to actually hunt its prey, despite the fact it's still in a box, regardless of how big that size of box is, does allow the reptile, the monitor, the tegu, the snake, whatever, to use more of its muscles than it would if it was just hitting a frozen thawed rodent, or quail, or whatever we're deciding to use as a prey item. They are able to use their muscles a lot more and have more mental stimulation if they're in a large enough enclosure, especially, and they're able to move around and look for that animal. So, in captivity, do they necessarily need to use all of their muscles? Maybe not. Is it good for them to exercise? Absolutely. So maybe that's something that we do as an alternative to live feeding, giving them an opportunity to, where are you going, Pi? To use those muscles to get that mental stimulation, where we still will feed the frozen thaw, which is honestly more convenient for most keepers. Even on a scale such as myself, it's more convenient a lot of the times, where it's safer for the animals. And then we start to actually mentally and physically exercise our animals by taking them out and using the different exercise pens or walls or stations, or just taking them out and about a lot more often than we normally would. That way they can get that physical and mental stimulation that they wouldn't be getting if they're just sitting in tub, aquarium, PVC cage, whatever. So this next one is probably honestly, I feel it might be more contentious than even the racks versus terrariums aquariums debate, and that is spider ball pythons. So, we all know about spider ball pythons. We've all heard from the super inflammatory people on YouTube, the more level headed people on YouTube, and the old school proprietors of ball pythons, the other dudes with ponytails and YouTube videos, hopefully not the drug problems that anyway, I'm not poo-pooing them. I'm really not. I just like to make that joke. I'm really not poo-pooing them. And with spider ball pythons and other morphs in there, they do have linked neurological issues. They really do. Do those animals necessarily have life-altering inabilities to where it's a matter of well-being and the care and the life quality for those animals? Maybe. I certainly wouldn't categorize a lot of those animals in with, like, say, the super motleys or the super jags that are those, or I think it's like the eclipse of the leopard geckos. I can never quite remember leopard gecko morphs that are in fact lethal genes, or even the desert ball pythons where there's something where the female cannot reproduce. Just period. So it's their only pet qualities. And so you don't ever want to breed the desert. Not the desert ghost ball python, the recessive one, but the desert ball python those are considered the lethal genes for sure, which is why we don't really actively breed those animals. But when it comes to the spider ball pythons, as far as like a quality of life thing, I don't know if it's quite the same thing, but I do also understand that it's not necessarily the best. So that's why I personally will not really be breeding spider ball pythons. There are other morphs out there that, while I do really like the look of spider ball pythons, I have a couple that are pets, like Wyoming, who's just a single gene ball python. He is an amazing feeder. I've had him for 8 years now. There's no issues, but he's never going to be bred. He's just a pet for me. But, I like the look of them. One of the very first morph ball pythons I ever saw was a bumblebee, and I still really like bumblebee ball pythons. But there are other morphs now that can achieve very similar looks that don't have those negative neurological effects, like bamboo and clown. When you add in other genes like caligo can reduce it, yellow belly can reduce it, pastels, fires, orange dreams, when you get to have more fun playing Dr. Frankenstein, making all these cool morph combinations and still achieving that kind of really thin dorsal spider webbing look with the bamboos and all these other morph combos, you might end up actually having more fun and honestly probably making a higher dollar value for all of you ball python people out there animal than just a spider ball python combo. So that's kind of, I know I'm kind of like placating a little bit, like playing center a little bit, but that's kind of what my opinion on the matter is while I don't think it's a lethal gene and that it should be outright like, no one ever do it, I'm not going to add to something that we know has problems, because why do we need to when there are other alternatives out there that are either more fun or even more valuable down the road? So it kind of eliminates that. And I know that there's the thing that, spiders are bred because we like them. Well, there's other morphs too. So that's my hot take on the spider ball python as I kind of muddied through this. Next one kind of goes along with the live feeding, and one for anybody who's been in it for a little while is just like, are we seriously still having this conversation? But I still see it pretty often in different Facebook groups and working with other people, and when I go to reptile shows, because a lot of the people I interact with are getting their first or expanding their knowledge and working with different things. Like I produce a lot of ball pythons and boas and more like beginner to intermediate level animals, the rhino rat snakes notwithstanding, and that is feeding in and out of the enclosure. And I'm serious when I see people absolutely freak out about what they should do about feeding in or out of the enclosure. And so essentially what this kind of boils down to is a couple different things. The first one was kind of this old idea that if you fed an animal in its enclosure, it would associate the door opening and tongs or hands or whatever with food. So it would automatically kind of trigger a feeding response. It would habituate that animal Two, if the glass opens, that means I'm getting food. So you would get a food response right away. However, that's very easy to disprove by the fact that, hey, if you ever interact with your snake more than just cleaning or feeding, it's not going to expect food right away 99% of the time. Yes, there are absolutely animals that will always have a higher prey drive or always be more defensive or reactive, but that isn't really something that happens very easily, as they don't automatically associate drawer opening, door sliding glass, cage coming up, oh, hey, this is food. The other one is for people that that think that it would stress the animal out. To where if you took the animal out, so you pick up the whole animal, you put it in a whole different container that may or may not smell like it, may smell like nothing at all, as far as like their enclosure or food goes, and then you take sometimes a live rat, or dangle a frozen throw in front of them, and then they eat that, and then you're going to stress the animal out, putting it back into its enclosure, and then you're going to make it regurge. So this one, while yes, it is pretty easy to stress out your snake, and this is mostly what I'm talking about is more snakes, although it happens with lizards as well, and monitors. All monitors are lizards, but this is also kind of a little bit of a myth where a lot of people have, and even I did when I very first started, when I only had, less than 5 or 6 snakes. I did have a feeding tub, where I learned pretty quickly that even handling a snake the same day, feeding in tub or out of tub, after they ate, most of the time it's not a big deal. However, do not put me on record for this by saying, oh no, Jay-Z said that, yeah, I can feed my reticulated python a 20-pound a 15-pound rabbit and then immediately pull them out afterwards. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that in the wild, snakes absolutely do have to deal with a lot of other outside factors when it comes to hunting their animals. And just you picking up a snake, putting it down, feeding it, and then putting it right back in after it eats, more than likely is not going to be enough to make that animal regurgitate a meal. Most of the time, there's either something going on with that prey item, or with the snake, or the husbandry, or how you're keeping it in general, is usually what happens. So what I usually will tell people is that it is not necessary to feed out of the enclosure. If you choose to, that's fine. In fact, a lot of times, like what's really happening a lot more now, which is great, is people will do feeding stations where they will physically have a little station. The snake will come out to that station. That's where it gets fed. It eats on that station, and then it will be allowed to go back in, or it will be allowed to be moved back in on its own as well. So it's the choice motivated and food motivated choices and moving. So it's physically leaving their enclosure to go do that as well, to do all these fun little interactions, including with feeding. So it's basically just kind of a bit of a myth that it has to be fed outside of the enclosure, and it is still probably considered very good husbandry practices to leave your animal alone for a little while, up to a couple days afterwards, depending on the snake, the size of the prey item, yada yada yada, after they eat their meals. And then this last one is a really big one. I don't think it's quite as contentious as like the spider ball pythons or the racks, but we hear it quite often, and that is cohabbing reptiles. So the two big things when it comes to cohabbing is you're going to cohab animals of the same kind, like, hey, I'm going to keep 2 ball pythons together, I'm going to keep 2 bearded dragons together, and then cohabbing different species. And so here's the deal with cohabbing, and I'm sure that, other people have talked about it, like, Wickens Wicker Reptiles has probably talked about it, Dave and Emily have probably talked about it, and heck, even maybe Brian has as well, and other people too. But cohabbing absolutely can be done very well, and we see it all the time. Every time we go to a zoological place, you often see different species or multiple animals of the same species in the same enclosures. But the biggest reason why it is super frowned upon, at least in the hobby, is that most people do not have the ability to do so properly. You need to have much, much more space and a whole lot more going on inside of your enclosure to house multiple animals. So if you're going to house multiple bearded dragons, you need to have a significantly larger enclosure, multiple basking spots, multiple spots to get away from each other, and plenty of room for them to move around to interact together or separately. Same thing with different type of snakes that can cohabitate communally. Garter snakes, they absolutely can cohab very well. I've seen bull snakes do it. I don't necessarily recommend it, but I've seen different vipers like rattlesnakes do it. Rhino rat snakes I know can do it. all sorts of different ones, but you have to be able to give them much more space, sometimes twice or more amount of space than you would a single one. So essentially you're going to take 3 times the amount of space that you would for 2. So if you have a 4x2 enclosure and you want to house 2 bearded dragons, you're going to need a 6-8 foot or more enclosure to house properly the 2 bearded dragons. And that's just something that a lot of people aren't willing to do or don't have the ability to do. The other one is cohabiting different species. Hey, little girl. So the deal with that is when you cohab them, they really have to come from the same environment, the same biomes, and you have to have the ability to give each of those species what they need individually in the same enclosure. So again, that means a much larger enclosure and a whole lot of other things. So we see it in different zoological habitats where it's obviously like it's a floor-to-ceiling thing. You have a more arboreal animal up at the top and you have a more terrestrial one at the bottom. They have entirely different areas. Do they have the ability to interact sometimes? Yeah, sure. But they have their own space and they more than likely will not predate each other. So for instance, another example. So for my big iguana cage, it's the big 8x4x4 enclosure where we have the redfoot tortoises on the ground, and then we have the green iguanas and the one rhinoceros iguana and then the one little Russian tortoise in there as well. So they all come from, with the exception of the rhinoceros iguana and the Russian tortoise, from the same areas of South America. The same humidity and temperature things do also exist for the rhinoceros iguana, as well as we've seen that green iguanas can be very adaptable, i.e. Florida, than originally parts of Central and South America. The conditions are very similar. However, redfoot tortoises, they come from the Amazon basin. They're very terrestrial. They need lots of humidity, lots of moisture. Hey, just like the iguanas, right? So they have a huge floor space with multiple water dishes, an additional ultraviolet light and heating element because ultraviolet light cannot penetrate from the top down. So the redfoots have their own UVB, their own heating, and then the whole floor. And then the iguanas have multiple climbing branches and platforms, plus their own mercury vapor bulb, which provides UVA, UVB, and heat for them. And they have the ability to go up and down and large and wide enough for them to get away from each other as well. I used to have a separate raised feeding platform, like a little bowl that was screwed halfway up the enclosure, and the iguanas just refused to do it. I would put food in their bowl first, and then I'd put food on the ground for the tortoises, and you would just hear wham! And that would be an iguana dropping 6 feet up in the air, down and just landing right on the ground and eating the food with the tortoises. So I just kind of gave up and put another branch right there. But they all have the ability to move around and get away from each other, and I'm providing an optimal habitat with the appropriate temperature, humidity, and ultraviolet light needs for the animals. So, and to be completely honest with you, it's not perfect. It really isn't. And I am always thinking of ways that I can improve. So I'm thinking about maybe putting in a very large little, basically a hide, but a large enough hide for the full-grown redfoot tortoises to be able to move in and out, to have an additional humid hide in, as well as a large platform for the iguanas to bask on, like maybe another large one for the rhinoceros iguana to bask on, because Kaiju really likes the white platform that houses the additional lighting and heating for the tortoises, and the larger logs, because the rhino iguanas do climb, but they're definitely more oriented towards terrestrial life than the green iguanas. Green iguanas in the wild aren't on the ground nearly as often as we would think that they would be. And then there's the Russian tortoise baobab, who would probably be better suited in the tortoise shed with the leopard and the sulcata tortoise, but he picks on the leopard tortoise, and she's already had a terrible life. She's rescued, really bad peer mating, all that jazz. So he is in with the redfoot tortoises because the male redfoot tortoise just kind of pushes him around, so it's not that big of a deal for them. So there we go. There are my hot takes. Racks, double-edged sword, necessary evil. Yeah. The live feeding, I'm personally not a fan of it. I understand the reasons why. However, even though I didn't mention it earlier on, I really don't think we should do live feedings on the different streaming services and video sites. It just doesn't really look good for the hobby outside of the hobby looking in. That's what it's gotten us in trouble before, where, other predatory sites have made it to where it's like, oh, look at this anaconda eating all of the puppies. And, we can't say that we don't do that when there are live feedings of us putting in larger prey items or other animals that think are cute, cuddly pets. while we understand it's part of nature, we've all seen The Lion King, it doesn't look good outside looking in. And right now, we really need to be on the defensive and keeping our hobby safe. So that was my little penny for my thoughts, off my soapbox. Continue on. Spider ball pythons, they're not necessarily lethal. I'm not going to breed them. We don't necessarily need them a whole lot anymore. Cohabitating, you just have to give the right amount of space, enough research, and plenty of room, time, dedication, and patience, and then feeding in and out of the enclosure. You don't need to do it. If you want to do it, cool. And if you do it out of the enclosure, maybe make it kind of like a choice-based thing where you have a feeding station or plat for them to leave the enclosure to eat and then go back into their enclosure, into their little safe space. So there you go. Those are my 5 reptile industry controversial hot takes. Hopefully it gave you guys something to think about. You probably already got kind of where I stood on a lot of these issues anyway at this point, but if you've watched any of the last videos over the last couple of years. But hey, hope it gave you something to think about. If you want to have, additional commentary, comments, add in your 2 cents, just please keep it civil. Otherwise, can't have that on YouTube channel. This is a safe place for everybody. So if you want to, add in your 2 cents, let me know down in the comments. You can always email me. Keep up with all the other fun stuff I'm doing on Instagram, Facebook, all that social media jazz. Again, hopefully you got something from this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got to see, little girl here just hanging out with me. I know she doesn't move a whole lot. That's kind of why she makes a really great animal ambassador. She just kind of hangs out. She doesn't move around a whole lot. She's like a very long ball python in that matter. But again, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you're having a great day, and we'll check you next time.